Welcome to Unit 2, Lesson 1. We're working on word problems this unit, and in this lesson we're going to look at word problems that involve mixed numbers and fractions. So first of all, I think it would be very important for you to understand what a mixed number is, and of course what a fraction is. So a mixed number has a whole part, so let's say that you and your friends bought three pizzas. Let's say you bought 3 pizzas. But after you had finished, you ate the whole one of them all the way, but you only ate part or half of the other one. So you have a whole pizza left and one half of a second one left. So you have 1.5 pizzas left. That's an example of a mixed number. It has a whole number part and it has a fraction number part. Then we have our fractions. That's just part of something. Some examples are 2/5 or 2 out of 5. So I don't have a whole amount. I only have 2/5 of it. And we might have that in a lot of different places in the real world. One of the main ones is if we look at recipes, and a recipe calls for 3/4 a cup of something. That is not a whole cup. It is less than a whole cup. So that is one way a fraction helps us to represent things that are not whole, just part of. So it's not all of the cup, it's 3/4 of the cup. So a mixed number again has a whole and fraction part, and a fraction has both the fractional part, just a fractional part. It's not the whole thing. Fractions can be written a lot of different ways, but these are just the basics for you to know. Okay, we have word problems again, and we are going to be using our 2 sheets from our intro lesson. So make sure you have your star sheet and make sure you have your keyword sheet handy with you. And first of all, we're going to start with the S, which is search. So we are going to read the whole problem and then go back and highlight keywords. So Ellen planned to interview some applicants for a position in her office. If she scheduled 1/4 an hour to meet each of them, how much time did she schedule for all 6 applicants? So I'm going to mark that she scheduled 1/4 of an hour to meet each one of them. We want to know about all 6. So here's one of those key words for multiplication. 1/4 of an hour for each of them. And who is them? Them are those 6 applicants. So I think I understand the problem. I'm going to translate the problem into math symbols or draw a picture or something. So one thing I could do, I don't have to do this, but I could draw my 6 little applicants. I'm such a great drawer. Just kidding. My daughter is. But I just draw stick figures. And for each one of these, she gives them 1/4 of an hour. So that's one way I could draw the problem and translate it. So that's what's happening. And so I answer my problem, so I just consider what math operation should I use. Well, should they get 1/4 each? So I could either add up all of these 1/4 or use multiplication, which would be better, and I could do 6 times 1/4. And so that is what I could also write out. There's my picture. But then I could write out 6 times 1/4, and that is 6/4 reduces to 3/2, or 1.5. Now again, use a calculator, and because we are dealing with the lesson on mixed numbers and fractions, we want our answers as a mixed number or as a fraction. And so 3/2 would have been acceptable, but we don't really talk about 3/2 of an hour. So 1.5 hours would be much better way to write it, because we just don't speak like that in the real world as 3/2 of an hour. So now I'm going to review. So I'm going to recheck my calculations. Again, you're going to use a calculator. Put it back in a second time, double checking yourself. That's the R of the review. I've searched. I've translated. I've answered. My review is going to be, does that sound reasonable? If she's going to do 1/4 of an hour for 6 applicants, that's a reasonable amount. If I'd gotten 20 hours, that would be an unreasonable answer. So I review my answer, make sure I did it correctly, make sure I answered the question, which is how much time did she schedule for all 6 applicants? She scheduled 1.5 hours for everybody. So she kind of need to carve that out during her day to be able to do all of those interviews. So there we've gone through the STAR method to solve that problem, which we're going to do each time. All right, so here we go again. We're going to start with S, where you're going to read it aloud and we're going to mark things that are key words. Instead of 1/4 of an hour, Ellen spent 1/3 of an hour to meet each applicant. How much more time did she spend meeting all the applicants? So we're going to need something from our first problem. So the first problem says she met with them 1.5 hours. So we're going to need that. Then this says instead of 1/4 of an hour. That's really not any information I need to know right now. What I need to focus on is 1/3 of an hour for each applicant. And applicants, remember, there's 6 of them. We get that from the first problem. This one is a follow-up from the problem before it. And so this time she's going to do 1/3 of an hour for the 6 applicants. And we want to know how much more time she spent. And so if we look at our keyword charts, that involves subtraction at some point. So we found out she'll do 1.5 hours if she does 1/4 of an hour. That comes from the answer to number 1. And now we've got 1/3 of an hour for the 6 applicants. I could draw the 6 applicants out again if I wanted to. You don't have to draw your problem out. You can do other things. But if I draw my 6 applicants, the poor things are all tired and their legs are all wobbly now. I'm just drawing fast. And they get 1/3 of an hour each instead. So I want to answer my problem. So if it's 1/3 each, and that involves some multiplication, I do 1/3 times 6. And I can do that on a calculator and get 2 hours. I've showed my work. I've written my numbers pretty clearly and my steps, they're in the proper order. So I have done that. So up here is my translate. It's in the problem. I'm marking all over my sheet, trying to mark things in and answer it. And this is part of my translate right here. I've written it out. So I searched it, translated it to a picture. I translated it into some math. That's multiplication. This is my answer right there of 2. But that is only part of what I needed to do. So I know if she spends 1/3 of an hour with each applicant, it will take her 2 hours. But the question is how much more time she spent meeting them. So we have to take the 2 hours she spent doing 1/3 each minus the 1.5 hours she spent doing 1/2 an hour each. And then we can subtract those. So she spent 1.5 hours, spending 1/4 of an hour each. I hope I said that right. It's 2 hours when she did 1/3 of an hour each. So 2 minus 1.5 is 1/2 of an hour more. So if she spends a third of an hour with them instead of a fourth of an hour with them, she'll need to spend an extra half hour more than she planned in the first place, according to problem number 1. Again, and is that reasonable? Yes, 1/3 and 1/4 of an hour is not that much. 1/4 of an hour is 15 minutes. A third of an hour is actually just 20 minutes. That's not much difference, so she shouldn't be spending that much more time with them. So a half an hour does seem reasonable. And so I've reviewed my problem. Okay, now we've got more about Ellen. So first we're going to search. We're going to read it and mark the key elements. After the interview, Ellen decided to hire 2 applicants and reject the others. Ellen's assistant called back the applicants to tell them the result. She spent 1/30 of an hour calling each of the applicants and 1/3 of an hour calling the calling each rejected applicant, and 1/3 of an hour calling the hired applicants. How much time did the assistant spend making these calls? Excuse me. So now I am going to need to translate this, and I'm going to look. We do need to know that she only hired 2 of them. So she hired 2 of them, then that means she rejected 4 of them. Ellen's assistant called back the applicants to tell them the result. She spent 1/30 of an hour calling each of the rejected ones. That's important. And she spent 1/3 of an hour calling the hired applicants. And then our question is, how much time did the assistant spend making these calls? Alright, so I've searched it, marked it all up, did what I was supposed to there. That's really part of the search process. Now I'm going to translate it. So we had these 2 applicants that she did hire, and she spent 1/3 of an hour with each of them. And then she had the applicants that got rejected. So these poor 4 guys were told they were not going to be hired for the job. And so she only spent 1/30 of an hour with each of those. Now I've translated my problem. Now I have 2 1/3, so I can multiply that. I have 4 1/30. And then I'm going to have to take the time she spent on the 2 applicants plus the time she spent on the 4 rejected applicants. So there's going to be an addition there. And now I can answer my problem. So my answer is going to be 2/3 plus 4/30. And again, I don't have a calculator with me right now. So 2/3 plus 4/30. I'm going to have to get a common denominator. So that's going to be 20/30. Plus 4/30. You do not have to do all this because you can use the calculator and get an answer by just plugging in 2 times 1/3 plus 4 times 1/30. But I do get 24/30, and that will reduce to 4/5. And so on your calculator, if you used a calculator, make sure it's in fraction answers for these fraction problems we're doing. It took her 4/5 of an hour to do the job that her boss asked her to. Is that reasonable? Well, 1/3 of an hour is definitely less than 1 whole hour, and 1/30 is even smaller than 1/3. So it would be reasonable to say it would be under 1 hour. So 4/5 seems reasonable. I could review my work by multiplying it back and inputting it in the calculator to double check I didn't input something wrong. Hopefully you have calculators like the TI-83s that you can see the screen, and that will help you. But you end up with 4/5 of an hour. So again, we've done it. We have searched it. we translated it, we answered it, and then I just talked you through the review of it. So again, I'm not having to write down a whole bunch of stuff for each step. I can mark the problem on the sheet. I can draw it out or translate it however I want to. I can review it by talking myself through it. I don't have to really write down a lot for that. Okay, let's do one more. And let's look at this process. So now we're going to go to Ethan. We don't have Ellen no more. We're going to search. Ethan is printing some materials for a meeting. If the printing of the first copy costs $1.50 and the other copies cost 4/5 of a dollar each to print, how much will it cost if he is making 13 copies? All right, so he's making the copies. The first copy, that's important, cost $1.50. And then all other copies cost 4/5 of a dollar each. Oh, there's that each word from the multiplication, using our common words for the math operations sheet. How much will it cost if he is making 13 copies? Well, that's important to know. So we're going to have the first copy. So the first copy plus we're going to have an additional 12 copies. Okay, so now I am translating my problem. Now that first copy is going to cost me $1.50. The 12 others are going to be 4/5 of a dollar each. Again, that's multiplication, so I have to take the first copy, which cost me this, plus the 12 additional, because there's a total of 13 copies, cost me this. Okay, I've translated my problem. I'm going to answer it. You can use a calculator. Remember, I don't have one with me. So 1 times 1.5 is 1.5. 12 times 4/5 is 48/5. Then for me to do it without a calculator, I'm going to have to multiply around and change this to an improper fraction. I'm going to have to get common denominators. So then I have 96 plus 15. 111 over 10. Okay, and then I'm going to take the 10 and divide it into 111, and that is going to go 11 times with 1 left over. So it's 11 1/10 dollars. No, we do not use fractions in dollars, so it's not the best example because we would use decimals to do any kind of problems with money. For like the majority of the time, I wouldn't say 100% because there could be an exception. So I have just answered the problem right here. I've translated it, I've answered it. I already put the A over there, that's okay. Now I'm going to review it. 1.5. I'm going to make sure that I got my 3/2 there. 12 times 4/5. 12 times 4 is 48. That's 48/5. Here I'm going to have to multiply my numerator by 5 to make it a 10 on the denominator. Then multiply by 2, and that is 96. That is 111. Divide that by 10. It does go 11 times. And you'll have 1 left over. It's 1/10. Is that reasonable for 13 copies? I wouldn't pay that for 13 copies personally, but you're talking about $1.50 here, and 4/5 is almost $1 for all the other copies, so they're almost $1 a piece. So they're a little less than $1 for the additional copies. So yeah, it'd be $11 1/10, but I personally wouldn't pay that. But if I'd gotten 200 or something for just 13 copies, I might think that's unreasonable. So this is the correct answer, 11 1/10, and it is in fraction form because we're doing fraction formed problems this time. You're going to try some on your own, maybe even as a class, whatever your teacher decides. So you're going to go on to the worksheet, the first worksheet, and get that printed out and do that worksheet either individually or as a class. You do the instructions of your face-to-face teacher and work on some of these word problems. And then I gave you a little game time in between that doesn't involve word problems, so you can have a breaks between the two word problem worksheets. I've also made them to where there's not a ton of word problems on each worksheet, just 6 or 7, making it much easier for you, I hope. You have a great day. Thank you.